Do you think society is becoming more secular? If you listen to the social commentators around us, it would seem so. Survey after survey purports to show the decline in faith and the rise of secularism. Atheism appears to be on the rise. There's even a humanist church in London. Those who declare in the 10-year censuses that they're of no religion are growing in number. So if you're a Christian today watching this, perhaps you're beginning to think that you're on the margins of society these days. But is society really becoming less religious? Writer David Dark defines religion as a controlling story, or the question of how we dispose our energies, how we see fit to organise our own lives, and in many cases the lives of others. In other words, our religion is the lens through which we look at the world, our world view, if you like. It's how we set our priorities, how we focus our desires, and how we look at the rest of the world. Now, for many people, their religion may no longer be Christianity, but they do have a religion of sorts nonetheless. Everyone is religious about something because they need that worldview. For many, including, it has to be admitted, many Christians, this religion has become the pursuit of happiness, or as David Zahl puts it, the pursuit of enoughness. This is the idea that if only I was successful enough, happy enough, thin enough, or good enough, then I would be enough. So I religiously pursue those things that promise to help me get that happiness or that enoughness, even if ultimately they don't satisfy my deepest needs. Now, if you're not sure about this, let me try and persuade you. In the late 80s and early 90s, there were several hundred studies about happiness published each year. In 2014, it was over 10,000 per year. We've been deluged by celebrities, personal coaches and motivational speakers, all eager to share the gospel of happiness. Just one example. In her best-selling 2006 book, The Secret, Rhonda Byrne writes, "The shortcut to anything you want in your life is to be and feel happy now." Our advertising and marketing is all based around this religious pursuit of happiness. I love the way that Pastor John Ortberg puts it in his book, Dangers, Toils and Snares. When we take our children to the shrine of the Golden Arches, he writes, they always lust for the meal that comes with a cheap little prize, a combination christened in a moment of marketing genius, the Happy Meal. You're not just buying fries, McNuggets and a dinosaur stamp, you're buying happiness. Their advertisements have convinced my children they have a little McDonald's-shaped vacuum in their souls. Our hearts are restless till they find their rest in a Happy Meal. I try to buy off the kids sometimes. I tell them to order only the food and I'll give them a quarter to buy a little toy on their own. But the cry goes up, I want a Happy Meal. All over the restaurant, people crane their necks to look at the tight-fisted, penny-pinching cheapskate of a parent who would deny a child the meal of great joy. The problem with the Happy Meal is that the happy wears off and they need a new fix. No child discovers lasting happiness in just one. Remember that Happy Meal? What great joy I found there. Happy Meals bring happiness only to McDonald's. You ever wonder why Ronald McDonald wears that grin? 20 billion Happy Meals, that's why. When you get older, you don't get any smarter. Your Happy Meals just get more expensive. Now, I apologise if the one thing that you're really craving in this lockdown is a McDonald's Happy Meal. Stay with me, please. As John Ortberg says, there is a major problem with a McDonald's Happy Meal. The happiness wears off. It's the same with our own religious pursuit of happiness. It fails to deliver on its promise. Scott Wenig tells the story of one enterprising lady in New York City. In New York City, there are 8 million cats and 11 million dogs. Now, New York City is basically just concrete and steel. So when you have a pet in New York City and it dies, you can't just go out in the backyard and bury it. So the city authorities decided that for $50, they would dispose of your deceased pet's body for you. One lady was very enterprising. She thought to herself, I can render a service to people in the city and save them money. So she placed an ad in the newspaper that said, when your pet dies, I will come and take care of the body for you for $25. This lady would go to the, wait for it, local Salvation Army thrift store and buy an old suitcase for $2. Then when someone would call about his or her pet, she would go to the home and put the deceased pet's body in the suitcase. She would then take a ride on the subway, where there are thieves. She would set the suitcase down, and she would act like she wasn't watching. Finally, a thief would come by and steal her suitcase. She'd look up and say, "Wait, stop, thief." My guess is the people who stole those suitcases got a real surprise when they got home. A lot of us are like those New York thieves. We're chasing after happiness and we grab whatever we think will give us happiness. However, when we get it, it doesn't quite deliver. The happiness industry continues to grow, but we're more miserable than ever. Chasing happiness, it appears, actually makes people unhappy. People are seeking after a religious faith, a worldview that will help them feel happy, that will help them feel enough. But they're looking in the wrong places. Pascal described an infinite abyss within the soul of every person, which is reserved for God alone. St. Augustine confessed, "You have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." These days we talk of a God-shaped hole in the centre of every life. The real God that many people seek is the one that they may have rejected for the pursuit of happiness, or maybe the God that they've never known at all. So it's not hard to see a connection with our society today and the culture that Paul found himself in Athens. Athens was a cosmopolitan city known for its many gods, pursuits, ideas and pleasures. It was full of idols. In fact, we're told in a population of just 10,000 people, there were 30,000 statues of gods. The streets were lined with these false idols, framed by the backdrop of the magnificent Parthenon and Acropolis. Athens was the retail shopping centre of the world's philosophies. Luke tells us in Acts chapter 17 verse 21, it should be explained that all the Athenians as well as the foreigners in Athens seemed to spend all their time discussing the latest ideas. Most of the gods that were found in Athens were related to some aspect of life. So you had the god of romance, Aphrodite, the god of reason, Athena, the god of war, Mars, and even the god of messaging, Hermes. In addition, you had philosophers like the Epicureans and the Stoics mentioned in our passage this morning, peddling their worldview to anyone who would listen. Epicureans believed everything happens by chance and that death was the end. They believed that there were gods, but that those gods had nothing to do with the world. In other words, they were practical agnostics. They believed happiness was the chief aim of a man or woman in life, so they pursued pleasure and avoided pain in their lives. The Stoics, on the other hand, were the complete opposite. They believed everything was God and that whatever happened to them was their destiny. So they sought to live with a kind of apathy and detachment, a sort of fatalistic resignation. But Paul comes along and spots something about these Athenians. Even in his deep distress about their idolatry, he sees them not as far away from God, but on the way to God. So he says to them in verses 22 and 23, Paul, standing before the council, addressed them as follows, "Men of Athens, I notice that you are very religious in every way, for as I was walking along, I saw your many shrines, and one of your altars had this inscription on it, 'To an unknown God.' This God, whom you worship without knowing, is the one that I am telling you about." Paul doesn't say to the Athenians, "Look, you've got it all wrong. You're pursuing the wrong gods. My God is the right God." Instead, he meets them where they are on their journey towards God and encourages them to keep looking, to keep searching. The God you do not know, he tells them, is the one God who made the world and everything in it. Perhaps he pointed to the Parthenon or any one of the other Athenian temples as he explained that God could not be contained in one single building. He explains his supremacy. He describes his self-sufficiency, God who isn't served by human hands like the gods in your temples who require constant looking after. He explains God's approachability, the fact that God has organised all of life so that humanity would seek and perhaps find him. Paul even reaches into the Athenians' own libraries, quoting Greek poets Epimenides and Aratus. In verse 28 he quotes, "For in him we live and move and exist. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring." Finally, Paul narrows all this down, his explanation down, to the gospel of Jesus Christ, saying in verses 30 and 31, God overlooked people's ignorance about these things in earlier times, but now he commands everyone everywhere to repent of their sins and to turn to him. For he has set a day for judging the world with justice by the man he has appointed, and he proved to everyone who this is by raising him from the dead. This is the controlling story. This is the worldview for human life found in the Bible. Jesus Christ is the one who provides the happiness, in fact the joy, the enoughness that we seek. Paul writes elsewhere in Colossians chapter 1 verse 17, he existed before anything else and he holds all creation together. The story of what God has done for us in Jesus Christ puts all our other gods into perspective. We recognise that everything else that we pursue in order to find happiness or enoughness fails us in the end. What we need to know is at the end of our life's journey, death is defeated and resurrection awaits us. As David Zahl puts it, those whose ears are habituated to the weary tune of never enough don't need fresh sheets of music. They crave the melody of absolution itself. In other words, those who have learned the hard way that the false gods of happiness and enoughness can't deliver what they're looking for might just be more willing to listen to Christ's message of hope. That might help to explain the results of a survey published just a couple of weeks ago and brought to my attention by Nikki. In this time of lockdown, this time of world crisis and fear, this time when death is announced on the news every day more than once, unexpectedly high numbers of people are tuning in to online or broadcast Christian services, including a third of young adults aged between 18 and 34. 1 in 5 of all those who've tuned in say they've never been to church before. 6,000 people telephoned a prayer hotline just 48 hours after it went live. Poet Frances Angermeyer described this journey through crisis in her 1943 poem, Conversion. In it, she imagines herself as a soldier on the front line in the Second World War and of his conversation with God as he awaits engaging with the enemy. Here's Tony to read the poem for us.
Look, God, I have never spoken to you, but now I want to say, how do you do? You see, God, they told me you didn't exist, and like a fool, I believed all of this. Last night from a shell hole, I saw your sky. I figured right then they had told me a lie. Had I taken time to see the things you'd made, I'd known they weren't calling a spade a spade. I wonder, God, if you'd shake my hand. Somehow I feel that you will understand. Funny I had to come to this hellish place before I had the time to see your face. Well, I guess there isn't much more to say, but I'm sure glad, God, I met you today. I guess the 0 hour will soon be here, but I'm not afraid since I know you're near. A signal. Well, God, I have to go. I like you lots, this I want you to know. Look, now this will be a horrible fight. Who knows? I may come to your house tonight. Though I wasn't friendly with you before, I wonder, God, if you'll wait at your door. Look, I'm crying, me, shedding tears. I wish I'd known you these many years. Well, I have to go now, God. Goodbye. Strange. Since I met you, I'm not afraid to die.
In this crisis, many people have discovered what they were pursuing for happiness and enoughness has failed them. And so they're looking for something else. Actually, they're looking for someone else, whether they know it or not. So rather than despairing over the rise of secularism, rather than worrying whether the Christian church is on its way out, like Paul, we need to begin where those around us are, seeking as we do for our happiness and enoughness in Christ, and telling our families, friends, neighbours and work colleagues just how much Jesus Christ has impacted our lives and the lives of our comrades. We need to demonstrate to them that Jesus Christ brings not just happiness, but joy into our lives and provides us with enough, and that his love for us helps us to know that we are enough in him. Every single person you know is religious about something. So may God help us to tell them of our faith that has enough for us and for them. We're going to remind ourselves that Jesus is enough for us as a way of framing our story for others as we sing together, all I once held dear, built my life upon, all this world reveres and wars to own, all I once thought gain, I have counted loss, spent and worthless now, compared to this, knowing you, Jesus, knowing you. There is no greater thing. You're my all, you're the best. You're my joy, my righteousness. And I love you, Lord.